Football on Off the Ball.
With Sky. All the football you love in one place. Across Sky Sports, BT Sport and Premier Sports.
Hard to believe we're just, a fortnight away from the Community Shield, just over 3 weeks away from the start of the new Premier League season. We're obviously right in the height of the transfer window, and to talk about some of the deals that are happening and some of the deals that may happen, we're joined by Miguel Delaney, the Independent's chief football writer. Good evening, Miguel.
Evening.
You love this time of the year, don't you?
Yeah, I think you possibly just heard my message ping there, which is basically...
Who is it? Who is it? Come on, tell us. Openness and transparency. This is exactly Sky Sports News. This is what we want. You have to read the text message now live on air and give us the exclusive.
I know, a certain amount of discretion. It's possibly just a five-a-side message. I haven't checked yet.
Let's start with Manchester United, or maybe Manchester United and Barcelona, who sort of sum up the madness of the transfer window, where on the one hand you've Barcelona, who reportedly 1.3 billion euro in debt, who've just spent up on 60 million on Rafinha, want to spend potentially 40 million on Robert Lewandowski, have expressed an interest in Bernardo Silva. And on the other hand, you've Manchester United, who don't seem to have any money issues whatsoever, yet can't seem to find a way of spending it. And in the middle, you have Frenkie De Jong, who may be an answer to a lot of questions for both of these clubs. Where are Manchester United with Frenkie De Jong right now? Because he seems to be their number one target in this window.
Yeah, and he's he's the number one target basically because Ten Hag sees a midfielder who could almost be described as unique, thinks there's no one like him in football, and also because he knows how Ten Hag wants to play, that he could accelerate their plans. But, this is a transfer that sums up so much of this window, principally how Barcelona and their problems are a hinge issue for so many clubs and basically almost influence the entire market here. Ultimately with that, Barcelona need De Jong gone. They've got obviously the two great bright hopes. Gavi and Pedri can play in his position or thereabouts. They don't need him. He commands a huge wage. He's a saleable asset, and they have financial fair play problems as they try and restructure the club. So he's an obvious choice that wants to go. In the middle of this, there's this issue that he agreed to defer his wages, which amount to 17 million euro if he stays on. But if he goes, he's not entitled to that. But then again, the flip side of that is he doesn't actually need to go or want to go. Now, people might wonder about Manchester United's interest in that regard, but basically, he's obviously been speaking to his former manager, Erik Ten Hag. So there's so many spinning plates here, so much leverage, so much where people, and as was put to me earlier, it's a case where people, everyone's trying to call each other's bluff. I think if De Jong had his choice, he wouldn't go. But he knows he's being pushed out of the club and doesn't want to make it easy for Barcelona, which is why I do think this will run and run. On the flip side, one of the things that was put to me today was, as regards this issue of 17 million, that Barcelona may seek to get United to cover it in a fee. But of course, United don't want to overpay. Also, from what I've been told here, there's a bit of a matter of this is something that's come across in European football a lot this season, whereas a lot of clubs are irritated by how Barca are going about their business this summer. And I heard it in particular the case of Bayern Munich with Robert Lewandowski, another deal that isn't done yet. And it's why most clubs don't want to give Barcelona an inch.
The conversation obviously was that Barcelona and Real Madrid, the days of them being the big spenders in European football were over. And maybe the fact that, Erling Haaland has gone to Manchester City and a lot of the best players in the world right now are signing for Premier League clubs. Is that, and listen, it's Rafinha they've signed, it's an ageing Robert Lewandowski running down his contract that they're chasing. Maybe they're not the biggest in the world right now. But how are Barcelona managing to do this with that debt hanging over them?
Well, mostly it's a case, I suppose, of some strategic transfer. I don't think they do. They have had more income as well, such as the CVC deal. They've had player outgoings, but I think the real issue here is more about what is expected of some of their signing, like players like De Jong, in the way they're trying to squeeze people, while at the same time just going out and paying these attractive contracts for players like Rafinha, and then players like potentially Robert Lewandowski.
How can they expect De Jong to just walk away from 17 million when he was obviously, you'd have to assume, doing the right thing at the time during COVID and deferring his wages?
Well, that's exactly it, yeah. And let's not forget, this is a player they persuaded to join when Manchester City really wanted him because he was supposed to be the future of the club. And, from De Jong's perspective, you can completely understand that. Also, I suppose the greatest respect. Probably rather live in Barcelona than Manchester myself. You want to get into kind of lifestyle issues and all that. But yeah, you're completely right. I mean, also, when you actually stand back, their offer to De Jong is actually kind of extraordinary, really. We're forcing you out. We don't want to pay you this deal that we'd agreed, and also saying and your one option in this regard. I think that's where there's a little bit of disappointment on Frenkie De Jong's perspective as well. There hasn't been more interest, but it's a Manchester United who some would say are restructuring and rebuilding for the future. Others would still call them a basket case. But to be fair, I do think the latter description is a little bit harsh in United. I think they're, at the very least, Ten Hag has imposed a modern shape in terms of football and is trying to start maybe a long process of trying to bring the club right round. But we may get to the point where they have to look elsewhere from De Jong because, or run the risk of this going right to the last day of the window.
And that would be the concern for Manchester United supporters based on what has gone on in previous transfer windows and their inability to get deals done. Usually at this time we're having this conversation, the angry Ed Woodward texts will be coming in and laying all the blame on his door. With Woodward gone and the change in the management structure, they've only signed one player. Are they getting better at doing their deals? Is there anything they could do more to persuade Frenkie De Jong?
Well, I suppose we don't. I mean, that's what Ten Hag is trying to do, and it is his former player. And also, I don't really think this is a case in that regard of United. There's a bigger issue here. United are almost caught in an impasse between Barcelona and the player. Now, I suppose if they don't get him, the questions will be why they pursued a deal that was so difficult for so long and why didn't they look elsewhere. Now, the answer to that, again, goes back to because of what De Jong could have represented for United's squad. In terms of, I mean, it would probably be easy to kind of go back into all the old criticisms about United, but it is a new regime. We should probably give them a chance. My greater concern, I suppose, would maybe be that it already feels like there's an element of this somewhere is exactly what we've seen before, whereas for all they talk about cultural reset and, having bigger plans and a bigger football ideology, they're ultimately kind of just going with everything the new manager wants. Now, that's fine, of course, if the new manager works out, but that hasn't been the case for the last few. And what it resulted with Solskjaer and Rangnick was a mismatched squad full of kind of different parts. Bits of Van Gaal, bits of Mourinho, bits of Solskjaer, little bits of David Moyes even. Not that he was there for that long. And I mean, this could be the case with Ten Hag too. And I mean, there's at least a question of whether it's, I mean, obviously Ten Hag is going to what he knows, like what a lot of managers do. But there's at least a question of why such an emphasis on Holland and particularly Ajax, especially given, like, if you talk to people in recruitment at Premier League clubs, even top managers, they'll say at this point, especially if you look at the case of Chelsea, and even it's a level up from the Eredivisie in the Bundesliga, but this is also indicative. The fact that Kai Havertz has been pretty good, but Timo Werner has been a bust. Or not, okay, a bust is a bit harsh, but really, it hasn't replicated his form for Germany. And one of the reasons for that, from talking to people kind of the European game and around England, is that basically the Dutch league and the German league are seen as two very idiosyncratic divisions where there's no baseline, basically, because they're two divisions that, and this is a consequence of how wealthy leagues like England are, really, but there's divisions that give a lot of young players a chance. They obviously both involve high pressing games, quite erratic football, quite fast football. And that means actually there's very little baseline. And two players that as we've seen with Werner and Havertz, really, two players that could be exceptional in the Bundesliga at the same time. One could actually be suited for England and one mightn't be, or for the top level. But it's so hard to judge because of the nature of those leagues. And that's why you would say maybe there's at least a small risk with United going for so many Ajax or former Ajax players, including Christian Eriksen. But I suppose it's what Ten Hag knows. But then that's been a criticism of United in the past. But there are signs of encouragement from training. A lot of people will look to obviously to win over Liverpool, even although to me that shouldn't really mean that in terms of result. What should be, I suppose, what should mean something is how much they're starting to impose his idea of football, and I suppose that is beginning to be the case. But it's from this emphasis on Dutch signings. That'll be my read now. It's not quite the mid-90s when, an Ajax generation were an absolute guarantee of real star quality.
Yeah, we could go through the success stories of the failures, I guess, from the Dutch league, and the obvious success stories are, Van Nistelrooy, Suarez, who come in and are two of the best Premier League strikers of their generation. There's a long list of players who came in and didn't make an impact, but again, I guess it's the right manager in the right place at the right time that was there for Van Nistelrooy and Suarez that weren't there for a lot of those other players. Like Mattia Kesman probably killed it for an awful lot of guys.
Yeah, and that's it exactly. And I suppose, if you talk about Kesman as well, look at his era. There was also kind of a bit of a precursor with this with Ajax, which point football it wasn't quite in the state it is now in terms of tactics, in terms of kind of economic structures, but maybe in terms of where the Dutch league was going. Look at the great Ajax team of 2003-04, the one that kind of won repeated Dutch leagues and had so many kind of budding young stars, and that Zlatan Ibrahimovic played for. Zlatan obviously went on to do good things. Van der Vaart maybe had a good career, but not quite what was suggested when he was at Ajax. Van der Meijden never really went on to anything. It was kind of the enigma of players like Mido. So yeah, it is one of the dangers from buying from a very youth-based league that is a level or two down from the elite, and that's even more the case now. Even if you look at Ten Hag's side from 2019, the one that got to the Champions League semi-final and generated such interest, that's been quite mixed as well. De Jong, who we're talking about, has been good, but hasn't gone on to the level we expected at Barcelona. Now, Barca have been a basket case, but still he's ultimately been kind of overtaken by younger players in Pedri and Gavi. De Ligt has been very hit and miss. To my mind, he always looks quite exposed, and while a lot of his defensive qualities are good, I think there are at least fair questions of where he can operate in a modern system. Then I suppose the biggest example of all is Donny van de Beek, given he's been a Manchester United signing. Although we'll see if, and this might say a lot in itself, whether Ten Hag can rehabilitate him.
Geez, there's so much going on at Manchester United. When you compare to 12 months ago when we thought they just finished second in the league, they had Rashford, Greenwood, Martial all scoring up towards 20 goals in the league, and you thought all three of them might kick on and bring them to another level, and all they really needed, it felt, was a centre-back and a Declan Rice, and that would bring them to another level. Whereas now it feels they're in a summer of a complete reset, and maybe they're getting there with the signing of Terrell Malaysia, full-back. Christian Eriksen comes in adding something in midfield. If they get Frenkie De Jong done, Lisandro Martinez, another option at centre-back. But still in those attacking positions, like the Cristiano Ronaldo news, I don't know if at people at United, did that come out of nowhere, the sense that he wanted to leave, or were they prepared? And how does that work with his ego if, as it looks like, nobody actually wants him?
Yeah, well, it had been bubbling for a while. But as you say, yeah, suddenly I noticed some reports saying Manchester United are beginning to convince Ronaldo that he should stay. Well, the reality is actually that there isn't a market for him at all. Nobody wants him, or not, at least no club that he would want to go to, that he want to challenge for, because what he really wants is another crack at the Champions League or another major domestic title. And there's just no interest from there. The one thing I suppose, you're right in terms of how different it looked 10 months ago, even going into the final few days of August, because they started last season with 2 wins and a draw. I must say, and this isn't hindsight because I did write at the time, because I was always a Solskjaer skeptic, really. I do think there was always a sense that the Solskjaer era was going to come up against a wall, that they were never really going to challenge under Solskjaer. But I think you can at least say he had a workable team, at a far lower level than a Liverpool without injury issues as they had the season before last, and obviously Manchester City. So he could have made something work there. Or he at least kept United competitive in the Champions League places before. But and as you say, he saw a Declan Rice type signing as maybe a final ingredient to at least have the team as he wanted. They didn't get Rice. They got Ronaldo, and basically a whole load of issues unspooled from there. I think maybe Ronaldo accelerated what probably would have happened with Solskjaer anyway, but it's an issue. And and now Ten Hag, I mean, this is another side of it. Ten Hag has to deal with a player who, as he tries to kind of implement a modern pressing game, a player who's really kind of at this point of his career, almost just the completely wrong player for a pressing team, because of how mobile he is, because of how much he demands goes through him. And that's just another quandary Ten Hag is ill. Now, to be fair, although the one thing I would say to that is Ten Hag had and it's why I think some of these stories aggravated United, because even if there was a mindset over whether, or at least a discussion over whether it might have been better to get rid of him, Ten Hag had accepted Ronaldo was there for a year, and he was willing to make him his focal point for this first year, only for all this to explode. So it'll almost have to adjust again. And of course, he's had kind of this crucial period of pre-season training without the player he wants to make a focal point. Although the one thing I would say for that is that Ronaldo's personal issue is genuine and has been accepted by the club. It's not just one of those lines. But obviously there's a bit of a discretion around it because it is, a family issue. But
is this another one, Miguel, then that runs and runs, like Ronaldo and his agent looking around at all those super clubs and going to keep putting the pressure on right till the end of the transfer window? Or does it look already that Chelsea have decided Thomas Tuchel has got his way and is got Raheem Sterling, is going to build more of a team than bringing Ronaldo into it, that if Paris Saint-Germain have no interest, that they decide in the next week he's staying and they move on? Or is this going to be just another saga that undermines United for the next few weeks?
I think, given his status as an agent, and let's be fair, I suppose, given whatever you think about the empire he's built up, Mendes is obviously a very sharp man. He's not going to leave himself in a situation where he can look stupid or left hanging out there. And so it's why I think they'll just decide to stay this year rather than kind of look around. Even if you look at the way the discussions went, they approached a fair few clubs. It's well known they approached Chelsea, and then found that there wasn't much interest. So then what I was told, they actually went to clubs like Chelsea and said Ronaldo would significantly drop his wage demands. He just wants to be in the Champions League. And they didn't get much pickup from that either. So when it gets to that point, they've probably just got to accept the reality. And so I do think maybe that'll be case closed in that regard. And the one thing you would say for Ronaldo is, partly because of his some of that ego, when it comes to playing, all right, he mightn't fit a system, he might play to himself, but he'll always be focused on scoring goals.
So in terms of just to finish on Manchester United then, and as the signings come through and a change of style and the new manager been able to implement that, we saw signs of it against Liverpool, and Liverpool and Jurgen Klopp were quite calm about it afterwards. He used 32 players. Now, if the result had been reversed, such as the basket case at Manchester United, that there'd be probably a bit of pressure on Ten Hag already if they were to lose 4-0 even in a friendly. What is the style of football, and who are the obvious winners from what he wants to do, and who are the guys who might struggle to fit in? Like, where does Bruno Fernandes fit in if Christian Eriksen arrives as well?
Well, I think actually I wouldn't be so concerned about that as other people, because from what I was told, Eriksen would be a possible, maybe not always a certain starter, but an option in a midfield that would go De Jong as a six, as kind of a Busquets player, then Eriksen, and then Fernandes in front of that. Now there were some issues around Fernandes and whether he'd fit into pressing football under Rangnick, but ultimately I think he has got incredible individual quality. And Ten Hag, I like Ten Hag for all, even though he's kind of an idealist in terms of pressing, and that's kind of a non-negotiable, his actual formations and approach he'll be a bit more pragmatic about that. And we are at the point now where he's assessing every single member of the squad. He's actually not gone in and said anything like, I want to get rid of him, and him, in the way other managers have done. So in the way Mourinho did, basically. It is kind of a clean slate. And I suppose the best indication like that is someone like Martial, who obviously so much talent, never fulfilled at United really, barring the occasional flashes. And yeah, he had a good start. So, but as you say, we can't really read much into this. But then the season's not too far away. And even like, I suppose to bring us full circle, if De Jong goes right to the end of the window, well, what we'd have already played, I think it'll be 4 Premier League matches, possibly 5 by then. We'd already be a bit into the season. It's so close now, which I think is something that can be overlooked.
Your phone has been pinging away, Miguel. Come on, give us your one big deal that's going to happen over the next few days.
I'd have to give it to the India course first. But I mean, what would be next? I think Chelsea are obviously pursuing 2 defenders because they want to bring in 3, and then they let Azpilicueta go. Kimpembe is a possibility. Well, that's an interesting, because anytime I've seen Kimpembe play for Paris Saint-Germain, he's usually been good for an hour, but Tuchel really likes him. Our Arsenal are looking for a left-sided centre back. Well, actually, that was an interesting one that was thrown to me, that actually got a bit of a backlash on social media, that Juventus have approached Arsenal about Gabriel. And while, I mean, I think Juventus would have to pay a pretty high price for that, given Gabriel's impact in the last year. From what I've been told, it hasn't been rejected out of hand. And also, the way with these deals, I mean, I think there's often a danger of looking at it in the kind of the short term and immediately how a player is doing, what his price should be right now. But like, there's obviously more aspects to this. Like, sometimes it's about, a player wants to move for other issues, or else it's about relationships between 2 clubs. But for the moment, obviously Juventus would have to go high. But at the very least, it hasn't been completely rejected out of hand yet. But I mean, it feels right now there's a little bit of a lull in the window. I know Sterling was completed yesterday, but that's been going on for a while. And actually, a lot of that lull is because of the backlog caused by Barcelona.
We obviously spoke a lot about Nathan Collins, and it's a huge story here. It's the most expensive Irish player ever, and a sense that maybe it's a bit of a bargain at just over 20 million. I don't know if it's made many ripples over in England.
Not really. I think it's one of those cases where, because he's been at Burnley, and because Burnley have had a specific style for so long, where almost kind of like the centre halves are seen as kind of like just solid blocks in a Dyche system before Dyche went. He's maybe actually been a little bit underrated. And I was kind of surprised that more clubs didn't go in for him, because if you talk to some people around football, they do. Nathan Collins is basically our brightest prospect in some time, and someone has the capability to be a top Premier League centre half. But then from that perspective, maybe this is exactly the right move for him. He's gone from a club that's relegated to one that's mid-tier at quite a young age. So it's rather than kind of jumping up further, where he mightn't get as much football, where he mightn't be quite as ready for it yet. And I think it's an encouraging move.
Yeah. Hardest working man in showbiz, Miguel. Thank you as always.
Cheers, Nathan.
Miguel Delaney there from The Independent. All our football and off the ball is brought to you by Sky. Get more of the sports you love on Sports Extra with BT Sport and Premier Sport.
Football on off the ball.
With Sky. All the football you love in one place. Across Sky Sports, BT Sport and Premier Sports.